Hi everyone, my name is Zach, and in this video we will take a look on how we can optimize the mesh. Because right now we have this high detail mesh with a lot of polygons, and in the next video we want to pose this creature, and with this high amount of details it's pretty hard to achieve. And because of this, we will optimize the mesh using an external but free tool called Instant Meshes. This will quickly automatically retopologize our whole mesh, and this low-res object we import back into Blender and project all the high details on this using the multi-resolution modifier. That means while posing the creature later on we have a low-res object, and then we can simply enable the multi-res modifier and we have all the nice details back. Yeah, without further words, let's get started. By now our creature has a lot of faces. If we take a look at the layer with the creature only, you can see that we have about 8 million faces. And with this high resolution, it's pretty hard to just add an armature system or anything like this and deform the creature. This will be extremely laggy. So here I will show you a nice workaround so that you can easily change the pose but keep all the details. So that means we don't need to reduce the mesh so that we just have a few millions left and then we lose all the details. So for this we will use an external tool which you can also download for free. This one is called Instant Meshes. Just go to this link and down here you find this pre-compiled binaries and just download this for your system. In my case Windows. Just click on it and it will download. I already did that. Then you have a zip file, unzip this, and there you can start the tool right off the box. You don't need to install it. And what this basically does is it retopologizes high resolution meshes pretty quick. So you have a high resolution mesh and then it builds a lower resolution out of this. So this is the first step. So let's first go back to Blender. First of all, we need to export this thing here as OBJ file. Important, this body here is selected. I just want to do this certain part for this body only because the other parts like the jawbones, the horns and so on does not have that many polygons that we get into trouble. So we only do it for the main body here. So this one is selected. Let's go to File, Export, Wavefront to OBJ and export it somewhere where you can find it. And down here I check selection only. That means only the selected object will be exported. Now let's export this. Okay, exporting is done. Depending on the size of this model, this can take a short while. Now let's open up Instant Meshes and you can see the user interface is pretty minimalistic. Now let's go on Open Mesh, OBJ, navigate to your exported file, click on Open, and wait a short while until the mesh is imported. So now the mesh is inside Instant Meshes. Now with left click you can rotate the view, mouse wheel you can zoom the view, and with the right click you can shift the view. And now we define a target vertex count. So when I now change this value, it must import or recalculate this mesh again. So that will take a short while. I think we will target something about 4,000, 4,500 is also fine. And then hit yes, that means it will recalculate this again. Now, basically we don't need to do anything else, just export this from here. But if you want to retopologize a mesh you want to use for animation or anything like this, you also can change the flow of the mesh. For this you simply enable Solve. After this you will see all these lines on the surface and you can imagine that these lines are building a mesh. So and if at some point you see that the flow of the mesh is not the way you would like to have it, you can click the comp button here and just draw some strokes on the surface where you want to change the flow. So if you do this, you can see it will solved again, and after a short while you can see the difference now here. And in this way you can change it the way you like it. You can draw as many strokes as you like. But in my case this is not important for me, so I delete this stroke here and I leave this as it is. So after this we click down here on solve. Then you can see how the mesh will look like in the end. You can see all these little squares. And then we can export the mesh. So first of all, let's extract the mesh. And now you can see this is our final mesh we have here. And although this is low resolution, you still can see all the important details in this mesh. So as you can see, this is pretty simple. So basically you just set the target vertex count, click on solve, solve, extract mesh. And now we can save this. I save this under a new name, hit save, and that's all. Mesh is saved. Now close this window and let's get back to Blender. In Blender, I enable the layer with our creature here. Then I go on File, Import Wavefront OBJ, and select the new one and click on Import OBJ. And now let's hide all the other stuff here. And now you can see we have two meshes. This one here is our high resolution mesh. And as you can see, the other one is our new mesh. It has a lower resolution, but don't worry, we can get all the details back. Let's quickly switch to edit mode. You can see this mesh here has 445,000 faces, and this is pretty low for sculpting. And imagine from now on, we only need to pose this mesh here. But anyway, we will still contain all the details of our high resolution sculpting. Let's go to the modifiers, add the multi-resolution modifier first. Don't change anything here at the moment, and then add the shrink wrap modifier second. Our high resolution sculpting is called cube. We should rename all that later on. Let's choose this as target object. And now he's basically projecting our new retopology mesh onto our high resolution dynamic topology sculpting. But right now, certainly this does not look the same because this retopology object has still the same amount of details. That means to have a higher resolution, we now have to subdivide our multi-resolution modifier. But be careful, don't put this too high. You can see with one subdivisions, we can see all the details pretty nice. And if we want to have more details, just click on this once again. And wow, look at this. Now we have all the details, and I don't know, this maybe looks even better than the original. Anyway, and if I now hit apply on this one here, then all this information will be stored inside the multi-res modifier. So that means I just can disable this modifier by clicking on the eye. Then we disable all the high details, then we can pose this low resolution object, and at the end we simply enable this button again, and voila, we have all the details. And the cool thing is you still can sculpt on this without dynamic topology. So if you have this multi-res modifier, this is certainly for sculpting. You can switch to sculpt mode and edit your details on the surface still, and it will look perfect. So and what we can do now is to delete our dynamic topology sculpting, because from now on we don't need this anymore. So first of all, let's select all the children here. Press Alt P, clear parent and keep transformation. And now let's delete this one. And yeah, now we have this thing here. And this will work much better for posing than a mesh with a few million polygons. As mentioned, all these parts here, the horns, the claws, all this mouse area here, this is not that much geometry. So here we are not in the need to retopo this using instant meshes and replace this and so on. You can do this if you like, and if your computer is maybe not that strong, but I don't do it. But there's one other thing that costs a lot of polygons, and these are the scales. And I was thinking about how we can reduce the resolution of all that, because I don't know if this retopology workflow works that well. But we are doing a similar thing as for the body, but pretty quick. And there's a nice workaround. So let's go down here to the scales. And let's just delete this two here, because this two we don't use anymore. We just use this one here. So let's press Alt G to set this back to the center. This is important in this case because it will also export the position of this thing here. And if we import this again, then the center point of this object will not be the same anymore. Basically, I just want to use the same workflow we did for the body, just for one scale here. And we could use the remesh modifier here in Blender, set this to smooth and increase the tree depth. But you can see somehow the result is not that nice in comparison to this instant meshes. And that's the reason why I'm using this. So File, Export Wavefront OBJ. Let's call this Scale and Selection Only. Let's open instant meshes, and since this is a very small file, this is super quick here. Let's increase this to maybe 1K. Hit yes. Then solve. And this looks fine to me. Extract mesh, and you can see we have much less faces than the remesh modifier, and the structure is much better here. So let's save this under Scale, Edit, Save. Let's go back to Blender, File, Import, Wavefront OBJ, Scale, Edit. Let's take a look at this. Sometimes, I don't know why this happens, I think this has something to do with the import-export. You can see all the edges in edit mode are marked as sharp. If this is the case, press Ctrl E and then click on Clear Sharp. So, and then we have this nice smooth mesh. And you can see now the position of the two are the same. Now we're basically doing the same thing as before. We add the multi-resolution modifier. In this case, let's subdivide this by 2. And then add the shrink wrap modifier and choose this plane 002 as target object. Now apply the shrink wrap. This is now stored in the multi-res modifier, as you can see. And now we are basically copying the multi-res modifier and this new shape to all of the other scales here. So let's move this up. But in this case, I don't know why, but in this case, the order is extremely important. We have to copy first the modifier and after this the mesh information. If you do it the other way around, this will not work, and I have no idea why. So let's disable the eye for the multi-res modifier. Select everything here. As last object, this one here, press Ctrl L and copy the modifiers. And as second step, press Ctrl L again and copy the object data. So, and if something like this is happening, this means the orientation of this scale here is different than this here. So let's redo this quickly. Let's select one of them. Local is enabled in this case, and you can see the Z-axis is pointing upwards. Let's check this here, and here you can see the Y-axis is pointing upwards. I think in the import menu you can change this. Anyway, we can also change this here, press Ctrl A and apply the rotation. But still there's something wrong. You can see the Y-axis is pointing to the right, and here it's pointing in this direction. So let's rotate this 90 degrees in this direction and press Ctrl A, apply rotation again. And now you can see it has the same orientation. With this Ctrl A, apply rotation, it basically applies the global axis, you can see this down here, to this mesh. So, and if we do it now again, this Ctrl L object data, this should work now, as you can see. So this one we can delete, and now comes the cool part. Basically, for posing our creature, it's important that we don't have million of different objects, so we now join all these objects together. But since they are all using the same modifier with the same subdivision, we will contain all the information of this modifier, although we join all these objects together. So with Ctrl J, let's join this. And after joining, you will see one problem. Since we duplicated all the scales from one side to the other, we scaled them in the negative direction. And in this case, also the normals, the front faces of all these objects here, will point in the other direction. But this is not a problem. Simply switch to edit mode. And since we just have 775,000 faces left, it's not that much anymore. Now press Ctrl N to make normals consistent. Now let's switch back to object mode and now see the magic. Let's put this down to 1 here and enable the eye, and you will see that all the shape information are still there. If I put this even higher, you can see that the scales are looking the same as before, as they should be. And we now have basically the same thing. We have a low resolution mesh for posing, but a high resolution mesh for our final rendering. This will now not be a problem anymore to pose, but we still have all the details we have sculpted. And we are flexible enough to go into sculpt mode with multi-res on and change the sculpting still, without dynamic topology certainly.